We are going to turn over into a bit of a Q&A time. I've had a few questions through on the chat. Thank you so much for those. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to message me privately or just to everyone in the chat, and I will read them out, because I feel like coordinating 47 of us over a live Q&A might be a little bit chaotic. So I will start, and I'll try to field the questions so that we get an equal mix between Rachel and Martin, but do let me know who you'd like the questions to be asked for. So I will start off with one that is addressed to, let me just see, to Martin, actually on Rachel's presentation, if you wouldn't mind, is: how do you think men can relate to the powerful stories of the women that Rachel talked about?
I think there's two things I'd like to say about that. One is that, on the one hand, we are privileged people. We are not oppressed people. In the sense that we are very wealthy in this world. We have a lot of freedoms that almost nobody in history has ever had, really, and comforts. So we're not actually like those women, even if we're women, but especially men are not. However, on the other hand, we do live in a completely different type of world where actually we are, as individuals, relatively powerless, and if we offend the state, we could certainly end up risking ourselves, or if we offend the public, we could end up risking our lives, our safety, if we take the initiative. So I think for those women in that situation, the injustices were coming at them all the time. They didn't have to go and look for them. The challenge for us is that we have to go and look for it, in a sense, because we can sit back and be comfortable. Certainly someone my age, maybe younger people might feel like climate change is coming over the horizon. But we have to open our eyes to what is really going on around us. Whereas those women didn't have to open their eyes, it was right in front of them. But we still have to have courage. I think courage maybe is the key virtue that we need at this time. Others have said that in XR. And with all these things, Ammon Hennessy, was a hero of mine from the Catholic work movement, thought that courage was the prime virtue, because without courage you can't practice any of the others, especially if it means not conforming with the spirit and the ways of the age and society or family, or perhaps often the biggest thing we can lose is our job, our livelihood. Are we willing to do that? We're more likely to lose that than our life, I guess. Then we would really be in solidarity with the least. And it would also, that's one reason for really trying to live very simply, is so that we've got less to lose, actually. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, Rachel.
So just thank you for taking that on, Martin. One of the things I think is really interesting is that the hermeneutic around women in the Bible from women can be a hermeneutic of suspicion, as Elaine Stalky talks about. And I don't have that. I do think that the Bible was written largely by men, but these stories were women's accounts. And I do believe that's really important. So for men, I get as much from reading the stories about God's dealing with men. In many of the stories, actually, they are sidelined and actually quite dissed down. But in these stories, one of the things it might jump in and encourage you all, is this beautiful book that's just come out by Elaine Stalky, who she heard me give a 5-minute talk on the 5 women in, and I was privileged enough for this lovely lady to ask me to write a foreword for her book. But this book is fantastic for men and women. It's about women in a patriarchal world, and it's talking around whatever gender or non-gender we are, we can all immerse ourselves in these stories. And I think that's just something that's beautiful to say. So I think I don't have a hermeneutic of suspicion around it. I do think these are women's stories, and I think, yeah, they're there. So that's one of my recommendations of books. That leads nicely on from you, Martin, from that. Thank you.
Thank you both. There's a question for Rachel again. what do you do when you're when relating to hostility in church? So more of a personal one. How do you handle that?
You know, what spy is in my midst? I think it's a really relevant point. I think, and this is where being a woman is relevant, okay? And I can only comment as a woman. So I am a woman speaking, and I'm totally pro my male brothers as well. So it's not a diss, but this is a relevant point as a woman. As a woman in church, historically, it's been harder. So we've got, if you are outspoken, extrovert, and a female, and you have a heart for injustice, and you have a heart for X, Y, Z, and you're prophetically calling out signs of times, it's hard. It's really hard. So the question was, how do I handle hostility? Is that the question? I think I would say that CCA has been an absolute God drop. I call these things God drops. God dropped through Michelle Barnes. She kind of said, let's go to this thing. So I think I found myself swept up in this most beautiful movement, and XR, I think, which has swept CCA within that. So I think for me, it's running with a tribe. You have to find your tribe. And my church, I'll be honest, is not my tribe. My church is my local community. Tricky. My tribe, they're not my tribe. Okay? Christian Climate Action is my tribe. Find a tribe. And then you can cut some respects, see what God might be calling you to do in your own church. And also cry. You know, I have cried buckets for being shut down and for being marginalized. And that's not because I'm a woman only, but it is also because I'm a woman. So there's lots of those things. And I think that's tough. And I want to be the shoulder that other women can stand on and say, well, let's all hoof each other up. So, but I applaud my brothers in CCA. I have got many, many deep relationships. And someone like Richard Barnard, who I don't know if he's on here, and Tim and Martin, that, you know, you guys run alongside, and I'm deeply grateful for that. But find your tribe is my best thing I would say on that.
Great. Yeah, Martin.
So I was just thinking about that question again, and I was thinking, I think what Rachel said was very, I didn't say really, thank you for your presentation, Rachel, very moving, challenging. She said that, you know, they offered their small actions with no idea what the outcome was going to be. They acted to be faithful to what they knew was right. And that's, you know, when I was growing up, we were 1 in 60 million in this country or something. Now we're 1 in 7 billion in the world, nearly 8 billion. Whatever any of us individually can do is always going to be very small, and we can't know what the outcome is going to be, especially on climate change, whether our action is going to make any difference. But that's not the point. I think we can see in these women an inspiration to do what is right, even when we don't know if it will achieve anything in one sense.
And also, just jumping back on that one of the things I think God profoundly challenged me on in November, and I preached on, was the fact that I think we've trapped God in buildings. And I think the most amazing opportunity for COVID is we are not stuck in a building anymore. Now, we're stuck in our own individual homes, potentially. That's got other challenges. But there's something about letting God breathe into the street, breathe into our communities. Whatever that looks like is different for all of us. So I think for me, some of the challenges of church is, are we prepared? I challenged my youth group recently on it, my lovely young 20s, one of whom is on here, Grace, hello, are we prepared to let the church die and be resurrected? And that to me is the challenge of Easter. Are we prepared to let it die in its current negatives, keep the stuff that's good, and let it be resurrected in our day? And that is the incarnated Christ into churches. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do believe we've got a massively important part to play, because we're used to people who've held eco grief know what COVID grief feels like, because it's part of a bigger thing. We have a particular voice right now, but you need your tribe. I couldn't do it without CCA, simply put.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions that I feel are related, so I'm just going to ask them together. And it's for Martin initially. It says, I love the example of leprosy and Jesus touching the leper and declaring him clean. It feels like Jesus uses his power here to liberate those who are oppressed. How do we think we can do this in the climate justice movement? So that's the first question. And then related is another question saying, I worry that if we emphasize how privileged we are, then we risk implying that all British Christians are middle class. I've known very poor Christians who've been really alienated by sermons about how privileged we are when they may be struggling to eat. Please, can we be careful about how we talk about this?
Yeah. I think just on the second bit, I think I usually say most of us are. I'm not saying everybody is. Yeah, it's a fair point. I think it's true most of us are. So I think those of us who have the privilege need to use it. not saying everybody's privileged. And even if it's not middle class, we're still globally privileged. Okay, what was the first one again?
First one was around leprosy and Jesus healing the leper and relating to liberating the oppressed and how we can relate it to climate justice movement.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think Jesus. I think part of what Jesus was taking on there was he was taking a risk. He was risking being associated. He might be declaring those lepers clean, but other people would be assuming that meant he's unclean. So he was taking the risk of being declared unclean himself and being excluded and marginalized. So he was, in a sense, I suppose, to use a phrase I've used in another context, going into their space. I think someone asked me once, how can you get more, ethnic minority people, for example, involved in some campaigns or direct action, or I was on a speaker panel. And I said, well, don't expect them to come into your space. You have to go into their space. You have to be willing to go to a black church or a mosque or whatever black community centre and accept their way of operating and dialogue with them on their terms rather than expect them to come to our meetings, essentially.
Thank you. Yeah, Rachel.
So just one thing about, I completely get that whole narrative around privilege and that kind of separation and those assumptions. And there are huge numbers of people who socioeconomically might be privileged but have mental health concerns or have their own individual pressures in their own homes. And I work with very, very vulnerable adolescents, and life is tough, and it's tough if you're in the UK. It's some pockets of it very, very tough. I guess it comes back to incarnating the gospel in our context. I can only speak where I have been God dropped. So I happen to be me in this context. Didn't ask for it, didn't ask for the privilege or the not, didn't ask for that, just end here. Now, there's a sense in which Martin's point is true. I have to use that. And I think some of the narratives it's really important to listen to both, in a sense, to the whole polarity of that, because, I've said I can't be another colour. I can't be a man. I am me. Now that means I have to work very hard, like Martin said, to take on the other. And that's really important. If Christians don't spend time in those spaces, we haven't got a hope. So I think it's the same thing with the LGBT issue is an injustice issue. If we don't spend time loving, walking. Jesus walked on the road to Emmaus with his people. So you've got to walk the walk. I think that's really important. And I think I'd love to see more. I mean, Exiles had lots of criticism around this non-ethnic diversity, but we as a Christian Climate Action have got to reflect that. We've got to get into those churches and into those groups and into those communities. In COVID days, tricky, but get in there and actually walk the walk and have that dialogue and have that openness, and to feel free to say, I'm not privileged. I'm struggling. I do not have ... So I think that's really, really important. Big good questions. Particularly, I know B just popped on there as well. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you guys. And thank you for the ongoing chat in the sidebar. That's really, it's an interesting conversation. And I think that tension between privilege and solidarity is really important to note. So thank you. I've had a couple of questions around church again. One asking about what do we do when the church is just apathetic? How do we overcome apathy? And then in relation to that, Martin, you give powerful examples in the Gospels of powerful interpretations of examples in the Gospels where Jesus is using direct action. Why do we think that the church often doesn't take those interpretations? The exact question, I'm just trying to find it so I read it right. Why do you think the church avoids teaching those interpretations?
Is that for me? Is it?
On first.
Go for it, Martin. Yeah.
The second part I can answer easier than the first.
Yeah, I wanted that question.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back historically to the Emperor Constantine becoming a Christian, the church being co-opted by empire, and church being very much part of the establishment in certainly in Europe and North America, and those not wanting those things to be talked about or understood. There's always been a stream of resistance and non-violence, etc., in the church has always been present. But ever since Constantine, it's been a minority trend. So, Rachel, go on.
And also, Mike Pierce wrote a brilliant book called Who's Feeding Whom? And it's M-E-I-C, Pierce, not Mike as M-I-K. And it transformed my theology 25 years ago, saying who's feeding whom? We have churches which are feeding roles within the church. So it has to continue that way. You daren't challenge that because those roles are being fed that way, which leads back to Martin's point. So we put structures up which kind of have allowed us to be blinded and blinkered, not to challenge the status quo. The brilliant thing about the times we live in now is it's all up for grabs. Now, that is not in any sense, shape or form taking away any of the hideousness that we find ourselves in, but some of the ways that society is going to have to shake itself, churches, shake or break. I mean, that's the reality of it. It leads kind of nicely on to the thing about apathy. I don't know, my experience is you either get the glaze over, you get the smile to hear, which is like lovely dear, apathy, or you get the pushback apathy, which is the resistance point about non-teaching, non-engagement, sideline you, marginalise you, have you as the bit weirdo group, you know, on the side. Both are forms of apathy, but actually they're not. I think they're a form of, below the apathy is fear. Okay, it's fundamentally driven by fear, which is fear of change, fear of status quo changing. And it's an instant, those of you who are aware of the Enneagram, Tim Denby, who's on this chat, said something fascinating to me about the Enneagram. If you're not into it, go check it out. Too little time to say, but most churches' leadership is full of number 6. And full of number 6s want tradition. They want the status quo. They want things to remain the same. Anybody who comes as an agitator or number 4 or number, whatever you are, I mean, heaven help them with outliers who push. We need outliers. Those people who push, you are deeply unsettling. So, and then what happens in my church is you have number 6s, or then guess what happens? They recruit more number 6s because 6 confirms a 6. That's what happens. So I think for me, the way I handle apathy is I expect very little. And then I visualize actually the church for the world and try and move it that way, but keep with your tribes, small and large, to kind of manage to be in a church. Some churches are reflected brilliantly. You're lucky and I'm jealous and envious, but that's not my experience. My experience is slow pushing a rock uphill. Okay, maybe I just leave the rock and move over to the side.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'm sure this conversation's got to go on many more. All of your opinions.
I feel like there are so many things to ask and say, and we've got so many interesting questions coming in now. We've got time probably for 2 more. So I'm just Flo, can I just jump back to one that was really early, and I want to honour that. This thing about banks, it takes 2 seconds. The bank, how you invest in terms of financially, there's lots of banks out there. So Triodos Bank, Charity Bank, Reliance Bank is based on everything to do with Salvation Army principles. All their revenue from that goes to the Salvation Army causes, the Ecology Building Society and the Co-op. Now, most of them hit high street. They're actually doing better than the high street. But what's really encouraging is the ethical banking has risen from 2,077 billion to 2,518 billion in 12 months. So people have a heart and they know it deep inside, this disconnect between saying one thing and then investing in armaments and et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to encourage you, I'll make sure that's available, but just check those banks out. Great.
Rich Barnard is a CCA, very strong member. He banks with Reliance. So there's people already doing this. And business accounts as well. So just, they're all out there, if that's helpful for that question.
Thank you so much. And just so you know, I haven't forgotten the earlier questions. I'm just doing it in a funny order, kind of around,
all right.
which may or may not make sense. Another question we've had through is, we as individuals and as a group have limited energy and resources, and the scale of injustice can be overwhelming. How do we choose which fights in which to engage and which to leave for others to take up? And just quickly before that question, we'll try and put those banks on the website or in this chat maybe. So on that question, Martin, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're here as a Christian climate action training session, and I have been aware of climate change as an issue for 30 years really, but I didn't really do much. I did almost nothing about it until 6 years ago, and the reason I changed my focus from peace and anti-militarism to climate was because it is the biggest issue facing our world. undeniably, I mean, we're in the middle of a virus emergency right now. That will pass. But climate change is the issue, which, okay, not everybody has, we can't, it's not going to be everybody's going to be doing climate change things, but we're here now. We're all here because of Christian Climate Action. So I'm going to say, I'm assuming for those of us here now, climate and environment related issues are the thing which we should be tackling. Obviously, we may be able to find something local that we can particularly respond to. Well, obviously local is, you know, it's very hard to do things not locally most of the time. Prayer and discernment, obviously, about what you specifically do in your life, how you can fit it around whatever other challenges you have in your life, whatever other commitments you have, what freedom you have. Prayer and discernment has to be, but I think, say climate and environment is the issue that challenges not just the world, but I think Christianity, because, you know, I think lots of environmentalists have seen Christianity as part of the problem, not the solution. So we need to really step up to the plate here.
Great. Just quickly, Rachel, yeah, go for it.
And just to jump on what Martin said, Martin talked about the macro, the big stuff. And what I would say is a really helpful image I have is like imagine the worst teenage bedroom, or a place where literally you can barely get the door open. So you can wedge the door, you can push it with your full weight, and you grab the first thing you can get to from that room, and you move that, and then you wedge the door a bit more and you grab the next thing. And I think for me, it's the macro, what Martin's saying, and then what can I do on the micro? It's the thing that is in front of my face that I can wedge against, pull against, and that image really helped me when I felt overwhelmed with the room is stuff full of climate change problems and poverty and everything. Grab the first thing that I can get at, lever the door, grab the next thing, lever the door. And then when you get a bit of leverage, then the room becomes a bit clearer to see, and then you can see the pathway through. So make a start is the key thing.
Great. Thank you so much. I know we've had a couple more questions through, but I think we're going to have to draw to a close there. Thank you so much also for the carry on the conversation on the sidebar. It feels like there is more to be said, and fortunately, I'm gonna concentrate now on a few ways that we can carry on this conversation going forward. Just one second.
Just one thing, Flo, I forgot to mention, this book is my other go-to Bible. Okay, if you want to be inspired about making changes in every single thing you do, buy Shane Claiborne's book. It is full of scribbles. Buy it, buy it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a great book. I feel like I come back to it quite often. So I just want to run through 4 ways that if you've enjoyed this conversation and you're not already keyed into CCA, ways that you can do. Firstly, specifically related to this theme and this conversation, there's going to be a chance next Saturday to meet again. At 11 a.m, so on the 9th of May, next Saturday. If you are interested in being part of another Zoom gathering, talking and carrying on these conversations, please email Christian Climate Action. I've put the email address in the chat. I'll just do that again now so that you can all access it. One second. Sorry. There you go. So please just send your email them, and then we'll be able to link you in with the Zoom so that we can have a conversation. And that will be with Martin and Rachel, and we'll be here again. That'd be great. Secondly, we are organising a CCA nonviolent direct action training. This would usually be a super interactive thing that's important to be together in person. So it feels funny to do it online, but it also feels like this is a moment that we want to capture and equip ourselves in preparation. So that is going to be on Saturday, the 23rd of May, so in 3 weeks' time. Put the date in your diary now and the details will follow. Just check our social media. It will be on Facebook. It should be on the website, on Twitter, etc. The details will follow. And again, that will be with Martin and Melanie, and I think I'll be there, and I think Rachel will be there, but whatever, it'll be great. And then thirdly, if you want to learn more about CCA generally, as Martin mentioned, we've published a book called Time to Act. Martin contributes in it, which he very humbly did not mention, as does Rowan Williams. Rachel's showing the picture there. We are having a book launch on Friday, this Friday. I don't have the details about it now, but again, check out on our social media and our website for details. It would be amazing if you could be there. And then fourthly, if you want to be involved more generally during the lockdown and then going forward, I've put a link early on the chat. I'll repost it in a second, to a blog that details loads of more ways of how to connect to us. Quickly, there's a 9 a.m. prayer slot every day at the moment that's going on that we connect via Zoom. The link's on our website. It's a really lovely way to start the day, or if you're really early, just break up your day. And then also you'll be so welcome to join a working group. We're organised with various working groups that contribute to CCA's action. So there's a pastoral working group, which is brilliant. There's a talks, training, outreach working group. Any of these we would love you to be involved with. So yeah, I'll send a link of that blog post through the chat in a moment. But that just leaves me to say a massive thank you. We've had 50 or so people joining. A couple of people have had to drop off now. It's been amazing to share this time with you. And for Rachel and Martin for sharing, that was brilliant. We so appreciate it. And Melanie for organising the time together. Thank you so much. And we really hope that we will see you again soon. Next week at 11 for a conversation further about this, and then, or even on Friday for the book launch at 7 till 8:30 p.m. on Friday, and then the NVDA training on the 23rd at 11 a.m. Thank you so much. We can close there.
Thank you, Flo, for that.
Thanks,
That's brilliant.
Flo.
Just in terms of the book launch, we'll have breakout rooms, so it will give people a chance to have more intimate conversations than this many people. And no, I can see some of the chats coming up. I think it's unlikely we'll use the same Zoom link, partly for security reasons. So keep an eye on our social media again, and we will put out the new Zoom link.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just one
love you all. What a great way to start a Saturday.
I know, isn't it amazing? Thank you so much. And there's just been a question around like NVDA in lockdown and what that looks like. And I feel like that's such a fascinating and rich question. Yeah. It would be great to be able to chat about that together next week as well.
We'll also be looking at that on the 23rd, what will be part of
the
conversation.
Thank you so much, everybody.